I don't think everyone fully hyped up with it. So I'm gonna, once you guys could hear it again, that's the energy we need. Thrilled to be here with all of you sharing today. Thank you.
The enemy. Several contagious, making even more excited. Self-awaited competition. But before we dive in, let's quickly remind everyone what IREC is all about.
Great idea, Gabriel. For those of you who may not know, IREC, or the International Relations English Competition, is a prestigious competition for high school students hosted by our department at Universidad de Manila. Here, we're exploring the catalyst of change in the midst of a global refugee crisis.
Yes, through this deep purpose, we'll engage in deep discussions and critical thinking, focus on the role young people play in addressing global challenges. With instant Filipino speakers, experienced coaches, and expert judges, it's going to be an enriching experience.
Very enriching. And to make it even better, this year's IREC has participants from schools all across Indonesia. With such a diverse group, it would be fun to get to know some of you. How about we get a few participants to get in front and see their opinions? Okay, I'll pick one person. You. Later, can you get in front? Yeah. You just please introduce yourself and tell me which branch are you competing for.
Well, my name is Station comes from in the sixth division.
Amazing, amazing. Speech competition. Can I get some cheers? Okay. How has your journey been so far for Ireland? And how have you been preparing for this competition?
The 3 years is tiring, to be completely honest, and frustrating too. I have been preparing by street school. Children, I have been preparing by diligently, I'd like to say.
Amazing. Like pretty sad. What are you looking forward most in today's event?
Morning.
Okay. Looking forward to something very, very interesting. All right. If your energy has been fantastic, you can go back.
Okay, so I'm going to call out one more of you guys. Okay, please do come forward. Introduce me, introduce yourself and how I've switched to adventure.
I'm Muhammad Biromatoli from Nasmalapan and I'm going to be competing in the Philippines.
Okay.
Okay, so you're really busy.
So this is actually my first time competing as last year I was still a leader and the registration closed before actually competing. However, so far I feel pretty confident. I'm competing with my friends. There's also a lot of my friends here, so what I'm doing is
I like your confidence. Okay, and what are you looking forward to the most today?
uh, honestly, I'm just looking forward to spending time with Trey because in the computer club, I guess we just slowly know each other, right? We just get to know each other more. So yeah, I'm looking forward to spending time with them.
So I and you're like fire.
And don't forget to have a lot of fun with your brain. Very hot now, very hot.
Okay, let's go luck in the competition for all of you. But before we proceed, we also like to extend our heartfelt gratitude to our sponsor and media partner. Without you, this event wouldn't be possible.
To Red Togro, March, Lieutenant Ryan, FBCI UGM, Indonesia Youth Foundation, and in Colombia.
Now, without further ado, to open the event, we are pleased to invite the representative of the IR department in UGM, the head of corps Mahasiswa High UGM, our beloved President of IREC or in the work incredible riches. So, Subito, as President of IREC of 2024, the stage is yours.
Alright. Good morning and welcome to the International Relations English Competition 2024. To the head of Secretary of the Department of International Relations Universitas Gadjah Mr. Rodin Mohamed Allah, received MI PhD. To the President of Forbes National Hubungan International, or Pamahin Universitas Gadjah to all our 2024 committee members, and to all of the amazing participants from all over Indonesia. My name is Ezekiel Pinto, and it is both an honor and a pleasure to stand before you today as the President of International Relations English Competition, or IREC 2024. First and foremost, let's thank the Almighty God for granting us the opportunity to gather here and for the program of the Academy Psychology with a healthy body and an exciting heart. I'd like to also say thank you to the Department of International Relations in West Korea for the endless support throughout the preparation of IREC 2024. I want to extend an credit as well to Forbes Manso International on Kamahiugan, President Kasai, for supervising IREC 2024. To all of the IREC 2024 committee members who have been devoting their absolute best for IREC 2024, from the early preparation during our pre-event competition, which is student ambassador, today, and I believe until the next two upcoming weeks. Last but not least, thank you and welcome to all amazing high-achieving high school students from all over Indonesia. All being welcome. Annual High School English Competition held by the Department of International Relations program, and of course, we the Sustainable Global Peace by promoting inclusive collaboration, specifically tailored for the youth. This year, we adopt the granting of youth as the catalyst in the midst of the global refugee crisis. So, we are 2024 firmly believe in the significant role of young people in partnering with experienced people and stakeholders to advance global peace for future generations. Over the next few days, we will witness an inspiring display of talent, intelligence, and creativity from some of the brightest minds from around Indonesia through our five main branches of competition, namely speech, storytelling, short story writing, newscasting, and debate competition. Besides that, we have hosted our pre-event called Student Investor Competition that is cultivated by 30 amazing high schoolers across Indonesia that have amazing passion and public relations. For our main event, from the September 13th until the September 15th this week, it is with our greatest honor to announce that we have reached the maximum quota for all branches of competition. We have 30 inspiring individuals that will be curiously compete in each competition of speech, storytelling, and newscasting. 40 creative individuals that will express their creative mind through short storytelling competition. And lastly, 40 teams that will exhibit their substantive argument critically debate competition. Which means, in total, we have 250 aspirational students from across Indonesia. Over the next few days, we will witness an inspiring display of talent, intelligence, and creativity from some of the brightest minds from Indonesian youngsters. And for the first time ever, we will be introducing the Grand Champion, which will be awarded for a high school institution who gives the best performance throughout our 2024 competition. Therefore, let us embark on this journey with enthusiasm, respect, and an open mind. Thank you, and let the IREC 2024 begin, and may the best win.
Thank you so much, people, for the warm welcome. Moving on, we would like to call the head Mahasiswa Haki UGM. So, this stage is yours. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. First of all, I would like to say a special greeting for the Secretary
a department in international relationship, uh, fellow IREC meetings here, and also welcome to the representative of awareness. Good afternoon, everyone. How are we feeling? Happy? So you can see we have been announced to you guys. Welcome to IREC 2024. My name is Muhammad Ryan Maikala. I am the president of Corpus Science of International on the 2024 to 2025. I am representing OHU as IR student body and also be heading and assisting activation of directed here. I would like to say my appreciation because our organizational values, which is inclusivity, equality, participation, and representation are also reflected in our explaining this year that is good as a benefit of the changes with global recognize. Um, from this grant team, we can not only commonly to be grateful because we can not only promote our values, ways that in general, also in IRES. And I also remember, I also participated in IREX committee last year as a license officer for the Bay. Just like it's not also made a big difference here, and with other, British rank here as well. I never thought being an alcohol, accommodating my participants, even there, monitoring the debate sessions, and even making, TikTok content with them would be, that valuable and memorable as hell. So now, especially media available. And yeah, I hope this kind of, gratitude and also we resonated with. And from that point on, I wanted to say thank you to fellow our communities here for making this event possible with everyone here. This event will create many champions and statements. And also my greatest excitement for the potential IREC this year. I hope starting today and space ahead, you guys can get your experience and get your connection, and also have a good deal of fun when you get to do with your future interaction. Maybe be or like it. Once again, make IREC Mr. Rick has good best experience this year. Good luck, have fun, and give it the best to IREC 2024. Thank you.
We're very much for the motivational remarks. Now, without further ado, we are pleased to invite the Secretary of the IR Department, Mr. Romdi Mohan Nadala, SEP PhD. The stage is yours.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I will get started, but I will want to hold the long ceremony for you.
First of all, let me to extend my feeling and appreciation for all support provided by Ayong, Mr. Jeffrey Lobovitz, who support the INEC 2024, and also for the student and infrastructure, okay, also future, curriculum committee coming from for this. So let me just say welcome and good afternoon in Jakarta, in the Department of Engineering. When I come to history, I remember my experience when I was fellow student in Western Hemisphere from Mozambique. During my time in fellow, not only I learned how to speak English, but most importantly, I learned a lot about not negative life, education, the powerful, the logic when we hold opinions. This IREC is annual program held by Komai, according to the contract, has been held for more than 10 years in certain development event. From their expedition, the purpose of this IREC is similar what I learned during my test. First of all, is to teach you how to speak properly about things. But most important is that you have to learn how to converse with you. It means you need to look up at the norms on a daily basis. Okay? Many student research studying about how to build from solution. Am I correct? Unfortunately, there's not debate. There's only conflicting trying to make argument without certain norms. So in here, I hope every participant learn how to conduct academic debate with norms or even needs to logic about communicating debate. While you say your argument, state your argument, you need to have the things logical and figure what you have. Okay, so these two things are important. And I hope by joining IREC 2024 together, we learn about norms and also how to build strong organizations. I want to limit my speech because the content is hard to figure it out. Okay. So, okay. Welcome to the program. I'm going to the Department of International Relations and also enjoy. Good luck.
Thank you, Mr. Rocky Mohanadala, for the welcoming remarks. Now, and to keep the image going, I would love to hear the voices from each of the competition branch. Okay, we'll start from the debate participant candidate from here.
From newscasting, can we hear your voice?
Next up, the speech competition. Can we hear some cheers?
Where are you sure? Sorry, writing people.
News chanting gang, give me your voices. Last week, please. Can you give me your voices?
I can see that you guys are the competition.
Hope you guys keep the energy for 3 days forward.
Okay. Now, let's remind everyone what are we going to do for the next 3 days. On the first day, which is today, we have started off with education, and then we will proceed to the opening ceremony with performance from your special guest star. Our keynote speaker session, coaching clinic, and technical meetings for every branch of the competition.
On the second day, we will have a full day, 9 to 5, of competition for debate, speech, storytelling, news chanting, and short story writing.
And last but not least, then would not be staying because the competition. And we will be having a closing ceremony with an awarding session and comments from our guest stars together at the end of the day. Very factor, you guys, like 3 days. I hope you guys eat well and rest well. So we stay tuned until the last day of IREC 2024.
We've got something exciting planned to keep the momentum going even more.
Oh, that is right. So what are we going to do next?
Yes, we've got something planned very exciting for you guys.
So it's game time! So to give you guys like up, we will play some games, have fun, and build with more connections while we're at it. How are you? First business game lined up for you. Like Sylvia, that will engage your mind and get everyone involved. Are you guys ready to play?
Since I'm ready to it, here's how it works. You use your mobile devices, so please take out your phones. You'll use your devices to answer multiple choice questions. Each question will test your knowledge on topics surrounding international relations trivia.
So let everyone. Guys, visit and see who's the most international relations trivia master. Okay, the information for the quizzes, please, and they will help you to the preparation. Okay, everyone, in front of you in this big screen, there are the QR code and the code for joining the quizzes. So please write it down. And if you have any difficulties, please just let us know. Thank you.
Don't forget to join with your real names. We can recognize who's the one winning the leaderboard.
Are you guys in yet? I told you.
Have you guys joined? Have you guys joined the group? So all of you participate so we can all compete with one another. Or anyone has joined yet? Anyone has difficulties joining the community can approach meeting you, give you some help. We're about to start soon. For those that are joined, please join now. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Play. You in. Okay, what? Do you guys want to get very curious right now? Are you guys in spirit to compete with your other competitors? Something you're doing? Doing to very please?
Okay, this one very excited. This part is very easy.
I, the final side is very focused. Answer the question.
Working together with your friend.
Working together, highly looking to winning.
Right. Right. What? Right.
Correct. Hey, when you see the ring, do you have to print in your name or is that your brand composition? I'm very interested in know. Why are we having this?
The first thing what we particular mental. Sorry. Okay. Yeah, I come for you me. Where I share great then one like hair. Okay. I want to know what your questions are. Or your opinion.
So like recovery process, so like recovery map, especially like very specific, like economics, stuff like that. Or which one is like in the EKM, like you can always see the winning things like yes in the break of the if the
Okay, I love it because we have a geography team here. Okay. Like, okay, first place winner. I'm here for you since you are on first place.
rather friendly. So like yeah.
All right.
Here.
Okay, so first and foremost, there's my action name, so let's put my let's see. I think it's quite easy. Just was something else. So, yeah, well, that's it. I was looking for geography and this in here because we were much younger. That's how I'm starting on this one because so that's
Okay, thank you. We started to get a king, I feel like. Okay, now for three winners in this one game, we have a little thing for you.
okay. Friends, you guys have won the first quiz competition. We are giving some gifts to appreciate your efforts and your geography-ness. All right, now you guys can go back. I hope you guys keep the confidence for the next 3 days so you guys can win the competition. Let's not luck everyone.
Keep your brain started and we want coaching clinic and everything.
Okay, before the next session, we will have a short break for 20 minutes. You guys can go to the toilet or can go out for a few minutes, but make sure to go back by 13:50, 1:50 p.m. We'll move on to the next session. Thank you.
Um, yeah, I'm a competitor. Yeah. programs, humanitarian response, and immigration issues. Hold a Master of Arts degree in which is from the University of San Diego. Bachelor of Arts degree in Political Science and International Relations from the University of California, and an international diploma in humanitarian affairs from the University of New York. Mr. Labovitz also is the previous IOM's regional director for Eastern Horn of Africa, previous IOM chief of mission Thailand, previous regional representative for South Central Europe, and previous IOM chief of mission to Ukraine.
Since I believe everyone is already looking forward to get new insight from Mr. Lavovich, to our speaker here that is currently present in the Zoom call. This space is yours. Enjoy the session, everyone.
Hello, can you hear me and see me? I hope everyone can hear me and see me well. I need confirmation. I see someone waving. I see lots of waving. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I wish I was in Jakarta so I can see your faces and also talk to people individually. But this is the second best thing. My name is Jeff. I'm the chief of mission here in Indonesia. I work for the United Nations. My first name is International Organization for Migration. My second name is United Nations. So I'm part of the United Nations country team. As you've heard, I'm the chief of mission here now. My previous job, in fact, as introduced, I was in charge of operations and emergencies for the entire world. Now I've been working in IOM for almost 30 years, which makes me sound really old. I guess I am. I'm really excited to be talking to students. I love talking to students. I come from a family of educators. My father and uncle were professors. My aunt was a school principal. My mother's a counselor. My other aunt was a counselor. There's 4 siblings. I'm the only one who's not an educator. And so I'm the black sheep, and I got into this world somehow. Okay. I hear some voices. Are you hearing me clearly? Okay, I'll keep going. The topic for today is youth as a catalyst of change in the midst of the global refugee crisis. So I'm going to give some context to global displacement. I'll talk about my organization, and then I'll talk about youth and what youth can do. So I'll go ahead and get started on that. How are we moving the slides? Next slide. There you go. It's a turbulent world. It's there is a huge amount of displacement. I'm going to give some statistics afterwards, but the numbers of people who are displaced forcibly and the number of people who are going voluntarily, it keeps increasing, particularly on forced migration. There's a lot of migration challenges in general, also for Indonesia, and part of that are conflicts. There's over 30 current conflicts in Africa alone. There's more than 20 in Asia. And so no one is immune. And each of those cause forced displacement, and people are in camps. That was a big part of my last job. I was globally in charge of internal displacement, of conflicts, of emergencies. My organization provides camp coordination and camp management around the world. We're the focal points for the entire UN system for camp coordination and camp management, along with the refugee agency. So it's really broad. We also have a lot of displacement due to rising sea levels and climate change. In fact, there's more people displaced every year due to natural disasters than they are to conflict. often those people who are moving from natural disasters go and then they'll come back more quickly, but the numbers are super high. There's also phenomena which are taking place, including hate speech, rise of populism and nationalism. When we had Rohingya boat arrivals, and I'm sure all of you have opinions about this, but it's a group of people who are really persecuted. They're forced to leave their lands. There's 1.5 million Rohingya refugees around the world. The population is about 2 million. There's over 1 million in Bangladesh alone. They talk about 500,000 remaining in Myanmar. And they're going through another wave of ethnic cleansing as we speak. There's been 20,000 Rohingya who've been forced from their homes, from the remaining 500,000 in the last few weeks. Often they're getting on boats and they're trying to get to Malaysia and somewhat to Indonesia. There's over 150,000 Rohingya in Malaysia, but a little less than 10% of the population. There's a couple thousand only in Indonesia. But what we saw last year was rejection of Rohingya arrivals and some hate speech and negative sentiment. So that's something we have to work with. There's also levels, there's economic crises and economic pressures. We work with returns of Indonesian migrant workers from neighboring countries and around. Sometimes there's trafficking, sometimes there's exploitation, but people look at going abroad often to earn money, and sometimes there's dangers associated with that. So that's part of the conflicting issues with migration. There's also a lot of good things about migration. There's people who find jobs and who are able to send home money. It's called remittances, who increase their economic prospect, who gain skills. And so not all migration is bad, but we look towards more organized migration. Let's go to the next slide. Thank you. So these are, truth be told, I like mathematics a lot. I thought I was going to be an engineer, and I like numbers. I'm going to keep talking. Hopefully I'm okay to keep talking. I like numbers, and so we're going to present some numbers here. There are 281 million migrants in the world right now. That's roughly 3.6% of the population. If you go back decades, the migrant population is around 3.2, 3.4, 3.56%. It's not massively high, but the populations are a lot bigger now, so the numbers are a lot higher than ever before. 281 million. There's more than 130 million people displaced. And so that means living in camps, living in the street, sometimes with host families. They're not going for work. They're forcibly displaced by environment or conflict. We talked about that. It is a huge number, and it's dramatically increased around the world. Out of those, 37.6 million are refugees. Refugees are defined as having a well-founded fear of persecution in their home country, so they were forced to leave. So 37.6 million. To give you a little bit of a perspective for the region and for Indonesia, we had a little over 2,000 Rohingya arrivals on 12 boats last year. We had 2 boats which overturned. And so I know about close to 250 deaths. It's a dangerous journey. They're fisher boats who go on the high seas. They're boats which are making the journey one time. So the boat is not coming back. So they don't use the best boats. The engines are not expensive. Sometimes they break down. Last year, there was one boat which broke down in the high seas, and unfortunately, it was confirmed to have overturned. We had another boat about 3-4 months ago, which had arrived in international waters, and these were both coming to Indonesia. international waters, and it seems like there was a fight on the boat. The captains were taking advantage, they were raping women. People came to help them, and the boat overturned, and half the people died. So it's perilous. It's not an easy story. They're paying a lot of money to get out, and they're trying to make their lives better. Like I said, the Rohingya have ethnic cleansing, which is currently going on, forced displacement in really large numbers. Another slide is talking about 10.5 million displacements. I think that's for Asia, which is 22% of the global total. Indonesia, I think, is number 4, number 5. Looks like number 4 on this chart. But China is number 1. When you talk about the 4.7 million in China, that's from natural disasters. So from earthquakes, from flooding, from fires, from mudslides. If you look at Indonesia, it's a country in the ring of fire, and government statistics show that there are 8 to 9 incidents of disasters every day. And so if you're looking at displacement in Indonesia, by this chart, it's 238,000 from disasters, but sometimes there could be much bigger ones. It's something which is a regular process, and because it's so regular, there's systems in place from Indonesia itself to address most of those individuals, but it's contributing to internal displacement. If you're looking at the migration phenomena, there's not a lot of foreign workers in Indonesia. We talk about 270, 280 million as a population here. The statistics we have are 168,000 registered foreign migrant workers. There might be others who are not registered. We hear about migrant workers coming to Bali, or migrants coming to Bali. For example, with the war in Ukraine, they talked about Ukrainians coming, and also Russians, perhaps not wanting to be to fight in the army, who came to Bali for periods of time. Those are not registered, but registered workers are 168,000. About half are Chinese, and then you have 10% Japanese, 10% Korean, 5% India. Not large numbers by any stretch. There's a huge workforce in Indonesia, and largely they're filling in those gaps. And there's not a massive amount of people coming here at the moment. But if you look at outward migration, you have almost 300,000. I think it's 275,000 who went through organized labor, government-to-government agreements through BP2MI last year. But however, unofficially, the estimates by a UN body, UN DESA, is that there's 4.6 million Indonesians working abroad. And those destination countries are written here. These are official numbers in Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Malaysia. Unofficially, I think it's much higher in Malaysia. And there's also, I think, larger numbers when you're looking at the Middle East, UAE, perhaps Saudi Arabia. Let's go to the next slide. Youth and migration. When I was, as introduced, I was regional director in Africa, and 40% of the population were youth. Then youth unemployment was 40%. So if you were looking about development, you had to look at the youth as the driver. The populations in Asia the birth rate is lower. They talk about 14.6% of international migrants are children, 16.5% in international migrants in Indonesia are children, so just that's about the same. And 11% of international migrants being youth. But youth as the target to look at economic growth and stimulation, it's a major issue. So I'm just going to plant that seed, is that we have to work with youth and youthful populations on how we adapt to climate change, how we provide skills to individuals who can't do the traditional work which was done before because climate change, and focus activities for the future. It's going to be involved with youth and youth education. The United Nations focuses its development strategy on something called the Sustainable Development Goals, and youth are mentioned in two very specifically, but it's really cross-cutting. They're really on everything. But there's quality education indicators, and that's 4.3.1 is participation of youth and adults in formal and non-formal education. There's also decent work in economic growth, and it's referred to that we need to reduce the proportion of youth not in employment and education or training. Like I said before, there are 4.6 million Indonesian migrants abroad. It's a huge population of Indonesia, and so that number reflects what a big country it is. Let's go to the next slide. This is a little bit about IOM's global strategy, and I'm not going to spend a long time on that. But our first objective in terms of refugee crisis on migration is save lives. So number one, save lives. And what that means is when we have a boat which is stuck offshore and they don't have food and they need a place to land, we're going to advocate for their landing. And for all the landings that have happened in Indonesia, we have been providing immediate life-saving assistance. We have offices in 12 different locations in Indonesia providing assistance to refugees. So it's something which we're doing here very much in practice. The second objective, and these are institutional objectives, is that we want to have and provide solutions to displacement. So we don't want people to be stuck forever. We want to have solutions to displacement. And usually we talk about 3 solutions for refugees, but it can apply for migrants too. One of them is return to their place of origin, and that's ideal, but sometimes they can't. The second option is to integrate into where they are now. For refugees in Indonesia, because Indonesia is not party to the refugee conventions, there are no local integration prospects. And the third one is resettlement to another country. And IOM works in all those different aspects. There's about 1,800, there's about 12,000 refugees in Indonesia. There's about 1,800 who move to third countries for resettlement every year. There's a smaller percentage. There's probably 100, 150 who go back to their homes of origin each year. Yeah. The third objective is facilitating pathways for regular migration. We talk about the 281 million migrants. Most of those people are working legally or irregularly. And in order to make sure there's rights which are given, we are very much encouraged by government-to-government agreements, their transparency in recruitment practices, rules and regulations for recruitment agencies, ensuring that people are working, that are getting paid, that their passport is not confiscated, that they have rights to complain, and they have rights and freedom of movement, issues like that. Let's go to the next slide, please. One of the things that IOM is doing right now, and I believe we have a person from Indonesia as well. I need to confirm that, but I'm 95% sure, is that the United Nations has an annual climate change conference, and COP29 is taking place in Azerbaijan on the 11th to 22nd of November. This is big. It's all the governments coming together and making commitments to reduce greenhouse gases, trying to make the future a place where we can all survive. And I wanted to mention this because one of IOM's flagship activities for COP29 to take place is to fund 20 youth delegates from different regions and backgrounds to participate. Again, I think there's an Indonesian, but I'm not 100% sure, but I believe there is. And what it is, and the intention is to incorporate voices, youth voices in the discussion and make sure they are heard when you're looking at solutions and commitments by government. So that's one of the things that we're doing right now involving youth. Let's go to the next slide. We're also trying to reach youth, and one of the ways we think we can do that is through goodwill ambassadors. We don't have one from Indonesia yet. If you know some famous person who is willing, please let me know. We have Mo Farah. He's an Olympic gold medalist. He was a migrant. He was a victim of trafficking. He's a great advocate for us. He was an Ethiopian runner. He went to the UK. He went to the UK and was exploited there in a job. And it's an interesting story. One reason why we want to reach out to youth is because a lot of the migrant workers are young and they're going out to get more work. There's a big phenomena in Asia right now called online scams, and it offers jobs on social media. And then what happens is people go. There's a big one in across the border in Myanmar from Mesat, Thailand, where they go and they scam other people. There's online gambling, there's romance scams, and people go there and they think they're getting a job, but they're actually have to scam money out of people. And then if they don't want to do that, they're forced to, and they have to pay back the expenses. But it's a big deal. It's not a small one. The one online scam center in Mawadi across from Mesat, Thailand, it's a virtual city. It's over 100,000 people. So tens of thousands of people. They talk about over 100,000 people going into the scam. There's been several thousand Indonesians. And so we're working through ambassadors to reach, and social media to reach groups like yours. Next one, please. Like I said, we're working on social media. Institutionally, we had 5 episodes on social media. Next slide, please. To try to tell the stories. I hope that you can access those types of information. These 5 stories are about refugees and their experiences. We also had some movies that were made by refugees themselves. So the use of social media, refugees also working with youth to share their information and share their experience is something which we think is important to share the story. And this is Indonesia specific. We had a movie we did last year with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs on the online scams, and it won 3rd place at a global film festival for migrants. We also had 5 of these stories, which we talk about here, which were submitted to them, and just about refugees talking about their stories, and so people understand more about that. I hope that if you're interested, that we can give you more information and links about that. Next slide, please. What can you do? How can young people amplify refugee voices and views? Learn the issue and be a part of advocacy and awareness. I talked to you about the mass information campaigns about Rohingya. I was in Aceh when they landed. I'm very much aware of the different processes. I've been to all the different parts of the country, and we're providing direct assistance. The vast majority are women and children, and they've suffered badly. There's no question about it, and they've suffered from persecution. They're not ungrateful. They're not stealing. They're not trying to make their own country in Indonesia. There's a lot of these social media messages which a lot of people believe. There are people who have been persecuted, who've suffered from torture and rape, who have had no access to education, no diversity in food, and they're trying to make their lives better. That's really the truth. It's important that we learn about the people, about the circumstances, and we get an understanding of their situations, and we can share that information. Whether or not Indonesia decides to host more Rohingya is one issue, but what I think that youth can do and help on is the perception that we're not vilifying, that there's not hate speech, that we're not saying untruths about a population or people, when in fact it's probably the most persecuted, or certainly one of them, persecuted populations in the world, largely because of their religion. So it's something which we can learn and advocate and make sure that we are aware. We can volunteer at grassroots levels and with initiatives, find out where there are refugee communities. The refugees in Indonesia, if they're children, 5 to 12, they can generally get into school. In principle, they could be in high school like you, but often the spots are given to Indonesians, and there's a test which you have to take, and it's competitive. And even some of our students are the best students in their school. They have to still find slots in those schools. And we have very few kids, excuse me. We have very few kids in high school, not because they don't have the ability, but they can't find slots. And then we have almost no in higher education. And that's because of funding, one, but it's also because they're not officially allowed to go to schools in Indonesia, higher education schools. So we need to keep working on that. You can work with those individuals, you can do some sort of tutoring, you can learn about them and their stories, and volunteering is always a nice thing. Innovative solutions and developing technologies, digital platforms for communication and education. I can tell you one thing, I was a math guy, I love sciences, but I'm not at an age where I'm going to be developing innovative technology, but you might be. And think of these communities and see what you can do to help. And then, of course, activists, policy influencers, people who reach out to their leadership and talk about and raise advocacy issues in a constructive way to work on solutions and ideas. Next slide. I think this is more of the same, and I think I've touched upon it. And so I'm not going to repeat the different issues. You can see the slide. It's about what's important, and what youth can do is reach out. I always tell a story. How am I doing on time, Revi? I'm going to tell a story really quickly. I was in Africa many years ago, and I was in a place called Sierra Leone. And in Sierra Leone, there was a civil war. And a part of the Civil War, they had opposition groups and they had elections and they chopped off people's hands. And it was symbolic to stop them from voting. Most of the people were not literate. They couldn't read or write. They had to sign with a thumbprint. And if you chop off their hand, they can't do that. And it was a source of intimidation. And there was a camp of people who had their hands cut off. And having your hands cut off was for anyone. There were children, and there was also adults, and there was also elderly. And I lived next to the camp of the people who had hands cut off. And I was there because I was helping transportation. It was during Civil War, but of refugees who were stuck in the middle of fighting, and they needed to get on a boat from Guinea-Conakry and come back to Sierra Leone, even though there was still a war in both countries. And so I was working on that. Every day I would pass that camp and I wanted to go look at it because I was curious about the phenomena of the people that had been hurt, and I didn't. And the reason why I didn't is because they're human beings. I didn't want to seem like I was going to a zoo and just to look at them. And I had a colleague, a Kenyan colleague named Sheha Ali. And I went to Sheha and I said, Sheha, let's go in and look. And she said, we can't do that. It's not appropriate. To make a long story short, one day we're driving home from work and she looked at me and said, let's go in. And we did. And we went in, and the first thing I remember is meeting an old man who did not have his hand. And I remember looking at him, and he looked at me and he smiled. And I grabbed what was his arm, and I shook his hand without a hand. I shook his elbow. And I said hello, and he talked to me. And he said, thank you for coming. No one ever comes here. Sheha then went and started talking to a child. There was a 1-year-old child who had its arm cut off, believe it or not. And she spent time with that child. And we went around, we talked to people, and we learned their stories. And I went to Sheha afterwards and I said, these people can work. They're stuck. No one visits them. They don't do anything. Let's get them to work. I hired about 15 of them to come work on my boat operation. Because even without a hand, you can still do some work. When I left the camp, the old man looked at me and he said, thank you so much for coming in. I love you. And it was an expression of, we're not isolated. We're not there. the point being is that there's open doors when we find that doors are open. We can keep walking past and we never would have had that experience. But when you go in those open doors and you reach out, sometimes you can do great things. And of those 15 people, they worked in those experiences. It became a big CNN story, a global story. And they worked and they had some self-respect, and then somehow reaching to them changed their individual lives. And so I want to encourage you as youth not to walk by open doors. Go ahead and open them and find out and see if there's something you can do. Thank you for letting me speak with you. I appreciate it.
Mr. Jeffrey himself.
Oh, I couldn't hear you before. Now I can hear you. I can't hear. I hope.
Okay, before this, before asking the question, can you name your name? You're from.
I can hear an echo. If there's any questions and you put them in the chat, then I can read it there and then I can answer.
My name is Sila. Sila.
I can't really hear, but if you write it in the chat, then I can.
Can you repeat your question?
That resulted in the wars in Sudan, the conflicts in Sudan, I mean, and like where did they go?
Yeah, I can't
Okay,
hear.
we'll wait for committee. Okay. We'll move on. Anyone else have a question for the ceremony committee? Can you give the mic so we can pull the questions in and ask Mr. Jeffrey? My name is no. Is my voice clear enough? Yes. Okay. For Mr. Jeffrey, I want to ask something. The refugee crisis is sometimes the problem is not on the solving of comprehensive nation. It sometimes consists of the nation's sovereignty. I want to ask about your maybe opinion or maybe a taste about the United Nations way or UN ways to handle the problems of national sovereignty to take the refugee crisis, to solve the refugee crisis, because some of the nations don't want to take or control over it. And I think is a problem for the young generations to do the refugee crisis. The future want to be a diplomat. I want to ask about the US maybe concept or maybe way to guide us, the young people, to solve the problem of nation sovereignty and so on. Thank you. All right, thank you for your question. Now we need two more.
Maybe they can put that in the chat as well.
Okay, so the first question. Are there any refugees in South Sudan and where do they go? Is that the right question from the first question? Hello? The person who had a question? Is your question? Are there any refugees in South Sudan and where did they go? Is that your question? Alright. For the second question, what are the UN ways to solve the nation sovereignty to help the refugee crisis? Alright. Now, moving on to the third question. We have two more.
Hello, my name is Freddy Jautama from SMA Sosial, and my question is sometimes the refugee crisis is directly clashing with the national interest of the nations, such as in the United States with the various South American refugees going there and the various pushback from the nations, various political votes. And also in Indonesia, where the Aceh people is not really like to accept the refugee from Rohingya. So how does the UN goes for nations to balance between their national interest and also for them to fix this humanitarian crisis to help these refugees?
Okay, thank you. One more question from one last questionnaire.
Thank you. My name is Zachary. I'm from Surabaya. I came from Trinity City of Western Surabaya, and we know that refugee crisis, especially around the world right now, is like big compared to what happened in Mexico. And I want to know what the UN is trying. What is UN? Role, and also what can they do to help these refugees, especially those who can even and register themselves in a country that they want for them. Because usually refugees they lost their identification and usually most refugees that we know, especially from the presentation itself, shows that there's a lot of unregistered refugees coming to like Indonesia, also another country. And what can UN do to handle this stuff, especially when what our friend also has, it collides with national interest of each nation where these refugees try to go. Thank you.
And before we let Mr. Jeffrey to answer the questions, we would like to clarify the question once again. For the third question, for the person who asked the first question, is your question, there are apparent backlashes towards refugees, such as American refugees in the US and the Rohingya in Indonesia. How can the UN solve that? Is that your question?
Yeah.
All right. For the fourth question, what can the UN help? What can the UN help for the refugees who can't register or are struggling to register in the destination country? Is that your question?
Yeah.
All right. Now, Mr. Jeffrey Logan, Mr. Jeffrey Logan.
Okay, it's a little bit hard for me to hear, but I have all four questions written in front of me. So I'll go one by one. Thank you for the good questions. I appreciate that. South Sudan. I'm going to come to South Sudan, but Sudan is a different country. South Sudan and Sudan used to be one, and now they're two. And Sudan is the biggest is the biggest displacement crisis in the world right now. I think we're over 10 million, and it's getting worse. I mean, it's just a terrible crisis. And they go to surrounding countries, and they're moving within their own country, and that's because of civil war. There's a rapid reaction force, once called the Janjaweed, and there was a coup d'état. They've taken up force. There's militias who are fighting for control, and there's immense displacement. And usually refugees go to surrounding countries because it's the closest. And so the most developed countries are not hosting the most refugees. It's the surrounding countries. Africa hosts the largest percentage and number of refugees in the world. It's also producing the largest numbers of refugees in the world. So the question is about South Sudan and where do they go? I've worked in in pretty much every one of these countries. I've been to about 150 countries. I was in charge of the war zones in the world, and I've visited almost every one. South Sudan is one I know really well, and I've spent a lot of time in South Sudan. And it was the biggest producer of refugees for a long time. I don't know the current numbers between South Sudan and Sudan, but South Sudan had immense numbers in Sudan itself. So people would go to the north. The biggest post was in Uganda, also in Ethiopia, and also in Kenya. And there were many, many millions. And there they can also, they live in camps, and they can also register for resettlement. Resettlement is only given to approximately less than 1% of all refugees per year. So most people do not get refugee resettlement, and so they wait for years and years and years and years. Uganda is the biggest refugee hosting country in the world. I think they're like 2, 3, 4 million. And they host the majority in communities where they can access schools as well. The South Sudanese displacement goes back decades before independence. I worked in Sudan before independence, and I worked on South Sudan during independence, and I worked also afterwards as regional director in that region. They also have a huge amount of internally displaced. The issues there are tribal fighting, factional fighting amongst tribes, and limited resources. There's subsistence living, and there's oil, which is 97% of the gross domestic of the money of the country, and it's going towards a limited few people. And so the real issue there is governance. But to answer your question, most are in surrounding countries. Some have been resettled. There's a lot of great stories about lost boys, if anyone's heard of those. The lost boys were part of the war between the South and Sudan. And they went through killing fields and walked for days, found themselves as refugees. And they were children, they were orphans. And in large numbers, they died. In large numbers, they walked in amazing long distances until they got refugee status in surrounding countries. And many of those people from that time have been resettled to the United States, Australia, Canada, and other locations. Let me go to the second question. How does the UN it's not really solving sovereignty, there's nation sovereignty. And so how do they address that to help in refugee crises? And the question relates to, the country itself is responsible for their own country and people in their country. And there's guidance, and there's refugee conventions. UNHCR is the caretaker of the refugee conventions. Like I said, Indonesia is not a signatory to the conventions, but they're fully responsible for individuals in their territory. And they are signatories to the rights of the child, to Human Rights Charter, a whole bunch of other areas. And they do host refugees. And so, and UNHCR does work here, and IOM also works here. And we work in coordination with the National Refugee Task Force. And that's a part of the coordinating ministry, Polukam. Deputy 5 is the chairman of that task force, and that works with the different governmental entities of Indonesia, including immigration and home affairs and the police and social affairs, and works to coordinate to provide assistance. So the United Nations is working with the governments who are part of the United Nations and giving capacity building, working within their structures, supporting their structures. And in the case of IOM, we're doing a lot of humanitarian assistance. It's kind of a burden sharing with the government who host the refugees. UNHCR, the same. So I think that's the second question. I should say that within the UN coordination mechanisms, IOM very much recognizes UNHCR as the refugee agency's lead on refugee crises, and we support them as the coordinator. They coordinate assistance programs, so they're the lead. Third question, okay. Now this is a good question, and it's something which makes my job really more difficult. There's backlashes towards refugees, and even more migrants for example, in the US. And it's absolutely true. It becomes a part of politics, and their hate speech is a part of that. Also the Rohingya in Indonesia. How can the UN solve this? I mean, it's hard to think where we can solve national problems, but we can try to work on tools to assist on those problems. Those countries have to be willing and wanting to do that as well. I mean, migration at sometimes has become so divisive that it's hard to even raise in a public arena. And if you're looking at politics and elections all around the world, it's something which is used to provoke populations for one political party or another. And we don't want to see that. We don't want it to be a tool for populism. We want it to be, because they're human beings, and we need to work with human beings. But I think what we can do on xenophobia and racism, and I think that's really the question, is that we can look at national experts, leaders, religious leaders, politicians, government institutions, the media, private sector, students, universities, look at discourse and education, dispel myths. A lot of things told about migrants are not true. There was just a presidential debate, I think 2 days ago in my country, in the United States. And part of the debate was that migrants were stealing animals and eating them, which has no basis in truth, is what I'm told. But so that's a myth, and it becomes politicized and used as a political tool. So working with national leaders, strong voices that are respected and have discourse to understand what's true and what's not true, and trying to work collectively to solve some of those problems. The advent of social media has been terrible for hate speech. That's the truth. We see it like never before. When the hate speech happened in Indonesia for Rohingya, and I very much saw it, and in some ways I was a part of it, I decided I wouldn't contribute. I didn't do any social media or even interviews because I didn't think that I would be able to help. But I did think that we could look towards Indonesian leaders and try to advocate for their inclusion. But at one point, I sent a photograph of children's shoes, because most of the people who landed were children and women. So rather than showing people's faces, it was just flip-flops of children that were on the ground. And the United Nations posted that photo, and it got an immense amount of impressions. Hundreds of thousands, and thousands and thousands of negative comments for a picture of children's shoes. And so it's not something I spoke about. The United Nations was kind of giving the image that these are children, and we don't need to intimidate them, and we don't need to fear them, and they need help. What I saw with that image and with other statements which went forward is that through social media, the reach was immense. I've never seen anything like it. When I travel, I ask people about perceptions, and invariably, if the person is 15 or the person is 85, they've heard something about Rohingya, and it's almost the same messages. So the penetration in the archipelago of 16,500 islands, some remote, is immense. And so it's something which we need to collectively work on. We need to understand social media for our advantage. We did work with Meta and X and others about hate speech. We were able to get some down. It looked like a lot of the hate speech was organized and funded. So that makes it also really difficult. There are even United Nations analytical units which look at hate speech. So they could see that even this phenomena, that it had been when the messages went out, which shows that it's organized and it's using bots and it's using influencers and it's paying influencers to get messages. And I think there's lessons learned from that whole process, but I also think there's a lot more for us to learn. Maybe that's something you can all think about and discuss, and how you think we can combat those voices within social media. Because frankly, I don't think we're there yet. I don't think we've solved that issue, but it's something we have to continue to work on. I do believe strongly that that you don't need to hear my voice, which I'm happy to lend if it's constructive, if it's useful. But you do need to hear voices of your own leadership and your own academics and youth leaders and educators who are sharing their experience and knowledge. That's a good question. The fourth question: what can the UN help for refugees who can't register or struggle to register in a destination country? There's certainly examples of people who've not registered, and it's not easy to register. And there's also a whole category of people who are happy to not be recognized. So they're working and trying to find work under the table irregularly. The vast majority of migrant workers in this region are not registered or going through government-to-government agreements. But for refugees, it's a different category. They're people who are seeking refuge because they can't live in their country of origin, not seeking employment, that they wouldn't be that economic migrant. In most places, and this is really a question which UNHCR could answer better than me, but in most places, there are processes for people to register as refugees. There's civic society organizations and there's government-led institutions, and they can register. There is a registration process here in Indonesia, even though they're not signatories to the refugee conventions. But that's what UNHCR is responsible for, and that's where they utilize partners, NGOs, civic society, and first and foremost, the government, to work on those registration processes. That said, some people do have a problem registering. I know that with Rohingya, that one of their complaints is that when they get to Malaysia, that it takes a long time to register. And I even heard of some refugees in Malaysia, Rohingya, who came to Indonesia because it was easier to get registered. But they do have a robust registration process where they have 120 to 150,000. But there's probably a lot more who are waiting. And so that's the core responsibility of UNHCR, working with governments and partners, is to ensure access and registration for refugees. I think I caught all four. I hope you heard me well.
Much, Mr. Labovich, for the very. As we close out this session, I would like to invite you guys to take a group photo by screenshotting the Zoom call. So just stay seated and give me your best poses so we can take a picture together with Mr. Jeffrey Labovich. Okay. All right. Go on. Take a photo. Technical team ready? Documentation team ready? All right. First picture. In 3, 2, 1. Cheese. All right. Second picture. 3, 2, 1. Jokjan. Third picture. 3, 2, 1. IREC. All right, thank you. Before we close it off, though, I'd like for you guys to show gratitude, say thank you, and wave goodbye to Mr. Jeffrey. Thank you. All right. Okay.
Have a great weekend.
Yeah.
the end of the closing ceremony, but don't worry, because we will meet again after the
IREC 2024 closing ceremony. Go first.
Well, before we close this session, we would like to thank all the participants for the exciting experience.
We would also like to apologize for any mistakes/issues happening today.
However, for all participants who would like to inform you that after this, we will have a break for the coaching clinic. So, before the coaching clinic, you will be directed to your respective groups that you can go for break.
Alright, that is all.
Here,
And we are signing off. Om Shanti 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 Om.
selamat budaya.
See you and good luck for the competition.
Before you guys went to your rooms, I will call out for your benches, and then if you see on the at the back there are our license officers that will be standby and help direct you to the coaching room according to your competition name. So I will mention the bench here, and I will also how to do it. And for any one of you that is competing on the benches, follow the lesson officer. Clear? Okay.
Calling the national officer.
Okay, now I'll go from where we share. Okay, everyone, the new chanting participant here is Kat, and which will guide you both to your room for the coaching minute.
Alright, for the next officer. I'll wait it along. The storytelling students will come forward.
The thing is, you all can stand up from the new chanting competition. Please stand up and follow Kat.
Next up, the storytelling officer, can you please come forward?
Okay, from new chanting, please follow Kat. Thank you for your
Would you take that up? Right, let's move on. Storytelling, could you please come forward? For storytelling participants, Daniel here, please stand up. For storytelling participant.
Bye bye. Okay, next we are going to the short story writing. Short story writing. Here it is. I'm not including your streets, the covered bit, and follow Kahana. So there
Friends, please stand up.
All right. Next up, we have this speech competition branch for the speech participants, which you please stand up and follow Kathmandu here. Speech participants, please stand up. All right, big shoulder, not with the speech mic. Good luck for the competition. Whatever your best speech is.
Okay, so for the rest of you, which is debate that you have seen, and you guys will say here for the coaching.
Alright, so maybe fill up your one seat to prepare for the question and since the rest of you are all the way participants.
Okay, guys, that's it from us.
From the good luck, thank you. Yes.